Hi everyone, Stepan here. Today I'm going to show you the Bowdler Attack, a Sicilian variation that's played in 9% of lichess games and in less than 0.03 actual tournament master games. So there have been 55 million lichess games with this opening, with bishop c4, and I don't know why. So the reason I decided to cover it is when I started playing the Sicilian on my training account, I would see this all the time, especially when I opened the account. The lower the rating, the more frequent this became. And the Bowdler Attack isn't really a good opening. Now, firstly, it allows black to equalize very easily according to the engine, but that's not important. Let's focus on what is important. The bishop is on c4, so all black has to do is play d5 to gain a tempo and to get full control of the center. You may say that the Bowdler Attack is playing for tricks, such as this one, let's say knight c6 and bishop takes f7. Okay, people have played this 800,000 times, and after king f7 they go queen h5, black goes g6, they take on c5, and then they hope to win the game, and eventually they do because it's low ratings and this is a trick. But once you learn these lines, there's no way you can lose this. For example, in this particular case you play d5 and the game is simply over. You're gonna go e6, there's no counterplay anymore. If the queens are traded off, you're a piece up, and if ed5 then e6, you're gonna pick up the pawn and easy game because the queen is attacked. So the Bowdler Attack is really a dubious opening and you shouldn't play it. However, if you play the Sicilian, you need to know how to face it, so I'm going to show you the most common ways to battle this. If you're looking for a more effective way to learn openings, try out Chessbook. It's a great tool for studying openings. It's very easy to use. It focuses on moves that people actually play. It explains the plans in certain positions, and it's going to highlight the mistakes you made in your games. So once you connect your lichess and chess.com accounts, it's going to focus on the mistakes you actually make. So you're going to be able to work on what matters most. You can import your repertoire either by hand or by, importing a PGN. So that's easy. Let's say save my progress. And you can then practice those moves. So if you go to, let's say, your black repertoire, you can see that mine is 89% complete. You can press import and you can use any of the PGNs I've prepared. You can find a bunch of them in the link description, in the description below. So import the repertoire and then you can start practicing it. So for example, if we go d4, d5, you can also have a bunch of pre-made repertoires from this position, and some of them are mine. I have created a Queen's Gambit declined opening repertoire for black, so you can start with that. I have created an e4, e5 full repertoire for black, and I have created the London system repertoire for white, and you can access them through Chessbook easily. So once again, once you connect your lichess and chess.com accounts, you're going to be able to correct your opening mistakes. So for example, in this case, I play h6 in the tile, and let's see what mistake I'd made. So in this position, you played e6, play the correct move on the board. Wait, what's the move? I think I should go bishop e4. No? And here, this is a good example. I don't know. Show me the answer. Queen e6 check. Yes. Okay. Damn. So you see what I'm talking about. I made the mistake in the game, and then once again when I was reviewing it on Chessbook, I didn't know what to do. You can also practice all the moves in your repertoire, which is obviously one of the most useful things you can do. You can play through model games in your openings. You're going to get served games daily, and you can view performance by opening, which will be there once you complete your repertoire. Check out Chessbook by following the link in the description below. It's only $8 a month, even less if you pay yearly, and I hope you like it. Okay, so on bishop c4, our main idea should be to play e6 and d5, get rid of this bishop, either force a trade, force the bishop back, but mainly get these two pawns in the center. So there are a couple of ways to play against this. E6 is my preferred method of fighting this. Knight f6 is the best engine move, and knight c6 is very logical, even though it doesn't control d5. So these are the three moves I'm going to be explaining in detail and focusing on. I'm going to show you what you shouldn't do first. Now, if you're a Sicilian dragon player, for example, or a Najdorf player, you may consider playing g6 or d6. And even though, let's say, d6 isn't bad, the engine still says it's equal, you're not fighting for d5, so you're not punishing white's play. This isn't a critical way to play, so you shouldn't do it, in my opinion. For example, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, you just got a normal Sicilian position. Why would you want a normal Sicilian position if your opponent has already made a mistake on move 2? So once again, d6 perfectly playable, but not recommended. And the same goes for g6. For example, knight f3, bishop g7 castles, knight c6, c3, and white's gonna go d4. It's just gonna be a normal Sicilian game. So these two moves, if you're a Najdorf or a dragon player, please avoid them. Play the critical lines, punish the Bowdler attack, because in the Sicilian defense, if white is given just a little bit of time, and especially if they have active pieces, and bishop c4 is definitely active, they may mount a huge attack. So we want to fight this bishop straight away. A very logical move, which I would also recommend that you don't play, is a6. a6 doesn't really work. The idea is an early b5. So after, let's say, knight f3, if b5 is played, there's bishop d5. And this is now getting slightly annoying. If you play rook a7, which is the only move to save the rook, then a4 comes and your a pawn is pinned. So you could get in trouble. I'm not saying white is much better, but a6 doesn't work. Not that a6 shouldn't be played in many lines of the Bowdler attack to gain a tempo on this bishop with b5, but just don't play it immediately. So now let's focus on the three main moves. Now, first of all, let's look at the engine recommendation, knight f6. So why is knight f6 such a strong move? And I should mention that e6, knight f6, and knight c6 are almost equally good according to the engine. This is just the best move. But the reason I think knight f6 is the most interesting is because you can get white to blunder very early in the Bowdler attack. Now in the Sicilian, inexperienced players tend to sacrifice a lot. So this is a good way to tempt white into, well, making a mistake. So the only move we're going to be focusing on is e5. Everything else really isn't critical. If, for example, knight f3 is played, then we can take the pawn on e4, so that's a big mistake. If knight c3 is played, we can play e6 and d5. And the same principle is going to apply. I have to apologize for the noises. The village on the island is just waking up, so you may hear people walking around. It's about 5:30 a.m. and the waves crashing and seagulls and crickets and all of that. I'm in a village, so sorry about that. And I cannot be in the house because people are still sleeping and I wake up at 4 or 5, so everybody would kill me. In any case, if knight c3 is played, then e6, d5 once again. But the critical way to play, and what most people will play, and the best move, is e5. And now here's the thing. We're not going to move the knight. Moving the knight would be a huge mistake. We play d5, counterattacking this bishop. And now white has a couple of options. Bishop b5 is definitely the only good move. If ef6, black has a huge advantage, very close to winning. We take on c4. If fg7, which seems logical, thank you for developing our bishop. Thank you for giving us the bishop pair. We go knight c6. We have a big advantage. With the bishop pair in a wide open center, we should be close to winning. Another mistake is e takes d6, where we don't take with the pawn. We take with the queen and we go for rapid development. So for example, knight f3, bishop g4, once again, an advantage to black. A lead in development, very good bishops, and we should be better. So on d5, bishop b5 is the best move. And now, of course, we don't cover with the knight. We play bishop to d7, and if the bishop's taken, that's losing for white. If the bishop moves back, you'll see what happens. So, first of all, if bishop takes d7, then of course knight f takes d7, we don't want to lose our piece. And you may think, well, e6 is tempting, but it actually loses. It's a free pawn. And we're going to continue with knight c6, queen c7, castles queenside, no problems at all, an extra pawn, e5 is coming, very solid center, big advantage. So on bishop b5 check, bishop d7, this bishop really should move back. And now, what did that bishop actually accomplish? The bishop came out to c4, there's a pawn on e5 for some reason, and we just go knight g8, and what we're gonna get is something resembling a French defense, but we're several tempi up. So for example, knight f3, knight c6 castles, e6, let's say c3, knight g7. This is just a French defense and black has a lead in development. There's just no justification for that. So that's the worst case scenario if you play knight f6, the best engine line. I should mention once again that all positions are equal according to the engine, but that's a pretty big accomplishment on move 2 with black. Let me show you a couple of thematic mistakes. So on knight f6, e5, knight e4, and you may be surprised, but this has been played, let me tell you exactly, 66,000 times on lichess. You just lose a piece because of d3, and the knight has no squares. So don't move the knight, play d5. Another big mistake is knight g8. You're pushing your knight back for no reason, so an advantage to white. So once again, if you want to play knight f6, on e5 play d5. And worst case, you get a tempo up, or 2 tempi up, and the lead in development. Now let's move on to e6. Playing e6 against the Bowdler Attack is what I do. If you had access to my training account, you would see that this is every single one of my games against the Bowdler Attack, and there have been many. Now what's the point? Well, the point is I want to go d5, and that's it. So if white plays, I don't know, knight f3, eventually I'm going to go d5. I may start with a6, or a6 knight f6, but my goal is to go d5. So most people are going to play knight c3, and they are going to be preventing d5 by force. So we play a6, and white really should play a4 here. If a4 isn't played, then b5 comes with a tempo, and we get to play bishop b7 with tempo. The e6 pawn covers d5. So if, for example, knight f3, then, you know, b5 and bishop b7 and d5 is coming. So this is a very, very good position, resembling a closed Sicilian, but slightly more comfortable than the normal closed Sicilian lines. So knight c3, a6, let's assume white knows what they're doing and they play a4. Now we continue with knight f6, and if they go e5, which they probably should, we go d5 anyway. So e5, d5, and the same thing applies. If pawn takes knight, then pawn takes bishop, and we're good. If en passant, then bishop takes d6, and once again, we're good. We may even consider playing b6, bishop to b7. And if the bishop, excuse me, should retreat to, let's say, a2, then we play knight g8. And this is, again, going to be a French defense. We're going to go knight e7. We're going to break the position with f6. The other knight comes to c6. But again, slightly more comfortable. If on e6 they don't play knight c3, but instead they choose, let's say, d3, we are now going to get a French defense without a light squared bishop, and d3 is a very common move and a very common inaccuracy. Knight c3 is actually best, and many people have played this against me. You go d5, the idea behind e6. If the pawns are traded off, which happens a lot in this opening, you shouldn't fear the pressure down the e-file. Okay, so bishop b5 should be the best way to play, and you go bishop d7, and of course white has to trade. And after queen d7, you have a French defense without a light squared bishop. If e5, which is the best move, then, you know, knight e7, knight c6, French defense, no bishop, very solid center, no need to play f6 because there is no bishop, and black has an advantage. But if they play d3, and you do play d5 and they exchange, and this applies to knight f3 or any other move that doesn't cover d5, the bishop will usually check you on b5. This is what people play for. And don't block with the knight, because it could be kind of annoying to face knight f3, knight e5. Instead, just play bishop d7. And if they keep checking, if they play something like queen e2, keep developing, don't trade queens, like bishop e7, knight f6, castles. If we had the same position, but white had the ability to play rook e1, it would still be no problem because of bishop e7. So let's say in this position we trade. We develop the knight. We can also take with the queen. I like taking with the queen because the knight really belongs on c6, and we're perfectly fine. If they don't exchange, once again, if bishop b5, we have a French without the bishops on the board. The same goes for moves like knight f3, as I said. So we can play d5, and that's fine, but I prefer starting with knight f6. I really like tempting white into playing e5 because I like getting these closed center positions. I think they are very rich, and I think they are slightly better for black. So knight c3, a6, once again we are trying to play for b5, and most people are gonna go with a random move here like d3 or d4 or castles. If one of those moves is played, then play b5. If a4 is played, then just continue with your development. So for example, in this case you can go d5, just continuing development, opening up the bishop, and once again you should be better. For example, takes, and bishop a2. One of the benefits of a6 is that bishop b5 is no longer possible, so we can go for this. And obviously you can see that having this big center with the 2 pawns on d5 and c5 is a long-term advantage to black. The engine thinks black is better, but we have to look at it from a human perspective. We have a broad center. These pawns are controlling e4, d4, c4, and b4. Okay, big advantage. But, as I said, most people in this position either play a random move or they know what they're doing and they will play e5. Against e5, and this is a rule in the Bowdler attack, we play d5. And you will know, if you play the Sicilian, that d5 is a dream move you are always trying to achieve. So in this case, sorry, there are mosquitoes and ants. Once again, I'm outside, near a lot of woods and in a village. So in this case, ef6 may be the best option, but they can again choose to move the bishop back, take en passant. We react the same way. If they take en passant, we take with the bishop. If they take on f6, we take on c4. So for example, takes, fg7, bishop g7, d3, cd3, cd3. We have the bishop pair. Okay, this is an isolated pawn. We have easy development. Usually, and I had this position about 3 times, I would develop with bishop d7, bishop c6, knight d7, knight f6. And then I would try to get the knight to d5. I would delay castling until I saw what white did. Okay? Now, let's look at knight c6. Knight c6 is the most common reply on lichess. 19 million games. Okay? e6 is the second most common. So knight c6. And I think knight c6 is a normal move. However, I don't like not controlling d5. That was a weird sentence. I like controlling d5, and knight c6 doesn't do that. So I don't think it's a critical move. It prevents c3 d4, the eventual attempt to play c3 d4, but it's not the critical move. So let's just get this weird sacrifice out of the way. If they take on f7, you take it. Okay? This has been played 800,000 times, and I cannot explain why. They play queen h5, g6, queen c5. And I'm gonna tell you what people play. People play e6 here, they play d6, they play knight f6, they play bishop g7, they play e5, they play king e8 for some reason, they play queen b6. No. You play d5. And after d5, it's absolutely game over, no counterplay. If the pawn isn't taken, you can take and play queen d4. If the pawn is taken, you go e6 and what? If d e6, which seems most promising, then bishop e6. Now the queen is attacked. Look, just consider the development. Two bishops developed, a knight developed, an open queen, the other knight's coming to f6, the king has shelter on g8, absolutely busted for white and no counterplay. Another move people like trying when you don't play e6 immediately is queen f3. This is very, very common. Like millions of games on lichess. Of course, no games in master games. And, you know, don't blunder mate, play e6, and that's the end of that. That's the end of the line. The queen is on f3 for no reason. The knight isn't going to be able to come out to f3. Therefore, d4 is going to be harder to play. And also, there's knight d4, which will force the queen back. So, makes no sense at all. Against knight c6, the best move should be knight f3. Okay, and we once again continue e6, which, again, I think we should have done on the previous move, but this is fine. However, since we played knight c6, we will get something much closer to a normal Sicilian. So they will go knight c3, preventing d5. We go knight f6, okay, and white gets in d4. And as soon as white plays d4, I think the position is closer to a normal Sicilian and easier for white to play than all the other lines in which black has the pawns on d5 and c5. So we can count on some tricks here. There are some tricks here. We have knight takes e4, and we will have this pattern in many positions with the knight on c3 and the bishop on c4, another downside of the Bowdler attack. So knight takes e4 and of course d5. You can see this in the Italian, in the Spanish, and in the Sicilian, obviously, and in many other openings. The best way for white to play is to take on c5. We take the knight on e4 so that we gain a tempo on the knight on f3. Queen d8, knight d8, bishop b5 check is what most people are going to play. Knight c6, knight d2, f5 defending the pawn, and so on. Black should be equal. It should be about equal. So once again, the Bowdler attack is one of the worst ways to play against the Sicilian. If you play e4, don't play this. Just learn a normal opening. You can choose the wing gambit, the Smith-Morra gambit, whatever, as long as it's normal. It can be tricky, but this really isn't tricky. It isn't tricky, it's just bad. So I would advise you to play e6. But you can also play knight f6 or knight c6. Those are, in my opinion, viable options against the Bowdler attack. And what I would recommend that you don't do is d6, g6, or a6. If you would like to get the PGN for the Bowdler attack, follow the link in the description below. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you think, and stay tuned for more chess. Bye-bye.